we at Youth Entrepreneurs Against Homelessness really strived for was the ability to cultivate that youth community while at the same time tackling the growing epidemic of homelessness in Vancouver.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vision for Life Foundation's first ever podcast. My name is Brody Lyons. I'm the Director of Volunteer Services with the Vision for Life. With me today is my co-host, Jenny Zhang. She is the Director of External Affairs with Vision for Life. And just if you're not familiar with our organization, just a quick overview of us. We are a nonprofit organization in the Lower Mainland, BC, Canada. We focus on empowering and helping out marginalized individuals in our community, giving them a voice and supporting them through several different means. We thrive on four main pillars. Those are providing necessities like our care package events that we've done in the past.
We also do outreach, so reaching out to other nonprofits and partnering with them.
We've done a bit of sponsorship, or is one of our plans and goals for the future is to help sponsor individuals, perhaps on the downtown east side, to help get them back into society and be re-immersed into society.
And we also strive with focusing on mental health and providing people with the proper resources they may need to sustain their mental health through such harsh times like COVID-19. And so today we have a very special guest joining us, David Zhu. He is a venture capital associate, a varsity fencing athlete, and the founder of Youth Entrepreneurs Against Homelessness, a Vancouver-based nonprofit focused on tackling the growing epidemic of homelessness in a sustainable and actionable way. So we are connected over Zoom today with David, and we are having an in-depth conversation or discussion of some of the stigmas and misconceptions surrounding homelessness. Thank you for joining us today, David.
No worries. Thank you guys for the hospitality.
Okay, so to start off, David, if you don't mind, could you go into a little bit more detail about who you are and what your organization does, just to introduce yourself to our listeners?
For sure. So my name is David. As Jenny introduced, I currently work in venture capital just as a summer internship. But I started an organization in late grade 11 called the Youth Entrepreneurs Against Homelessness Initiative, which is a charitable initiative dedicated to tackling the growing epidemic of homelessness through three pillars of helping provide interest-free microloans to those that are in need, connecting those to housing resources that would give them access to better opportunities with limited resources, and lastly, financial literacy education to help promote this environment of positivity where one is able to make more and do more with the limited amount of resources that they have. This is done hand in hand with the cultivation of a future generation of leaders where we're trying to empower them and give them the capacity to understand how much change each and every person really can bring about in this world.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing initiative that you've started, and all the way back in grade 11, when you were like quite young at the time, like what, 16, 17 probably? That's amazing that you're able to build this from the ground up.
I mean, I can't take all the credit. I had a lot of help from other people, and I think that's the kind of central topic here, right? It's none of us can make it as far as we have without the help of others.
Yeah. So with this group of people, sorry, with this group of people, was there like a particular moment in your life that sparked this idea or sparked all this motivation, or was it something that grew slowly through time, or like what exactly like inspired you to start Youth Entrepreneurs?
This started in grade 10, so I was part of another charitable initiative that was specifically a fundraising project for women in Ghana. It would have helped provide the education, training, and resources for them to build their own little business in their community, which would give them the power of generating income, which would help a lot in terms of helping kind of uh, progress certain limitations possessed by the community there. Through that, we ended up thinking, like in our backyard of Vancouver, homelessness has been an incredible issue. Right? As much as we centralize it and kind of, I guess, concentrated in the downtown Vancouver area, homelessness is still a huge problem that is plaguing our community in its whole. And I was thinking with a couple of buddies that I was with at the other charitable initiative, and I was like, it's a fundraising for what's also a noble cause. Why don't we focus on something in our backyards? Why don't we, tackle a problem that is existing in our communities first before we really kind of move on and kind of be more empathetic to others on an international scale? And that was what prompted everything. It was like, okay, what's the big issue we have? Well, homelessness. Who are the best stakeholders that we can work with? Been in contact with Frank Justra, been in contact with X, Y, and Z. Let's see if we can get some help.
Amazing. Just take on that personal connection with it, and to be in your backyard. For us, we focused with our organization has been mostly centralized around parks on the downtown east side. We've done a few when things were not locked down with COVID. We were doing some food donations, dropping them off out there, and other things where we can just help out and kind of interact with them on the downtown east side, and just develop those real life connections with them, because they're people, and sometimes these stigmas kind of separate us, and we kind of lose track of that. So that's awesome that you were able to connect with them that way, doing things like you said, microloans too. Do you want to explain a little bit more of what that entails?
Yeah, so we were working hand in hand with an organization called the Vancouver Rent Bank. And what they specialized with and what they specialized in was being actually integrated into the communities of homelessness. A lot of times with homelessness charities, what ends up happening is you have charities with money that are delivered in an improper way, that are given to individuals that might not have necessarily qualified for it. But there's just a whole slew of issues surrounding the integration of capital, let alone the securing of capital. So what the Vancouver Rent Bank does really well is that it has people that it communicates to in the community, whether it be through the low-income housing projects, whether it be through various homelessness, I guess, resources that are available across the city. So what it really entails is, instead of a kind of a money delivery system to whoever applies, it's more of kind of a needs-based criteria in evaluating who would qualify for a microloan. So, we started with the idea of something that was more sustainable in tackling homelessness, right? So we were thinking there's already enough organizations tackling, the already very deep into homelessness population, those of which that live in the downtown east side on the streets with, less access to resources, but few charities focus on the prevention of homelessness, which is actually our main decree, right? Statistically speaking, it's the cheapest to save someone from homelessness the earlier on in the process, because what that entails and what that gives you the capacity to do is it makes it so that they don't fall into a kind of a negative repetitious cycle of falling deeper and deeper into the hole of homelessness, right? Because it's a spiral and one thing leads to another. So we thought, okay, microloans historically are very effective vehicles of delivering capital, of delivering kind of value even to those on the brink of homelessness. But how can we as students provide it, right? We were grade 11, grade 12 students with a couple of, adults on our side, but at its core, there's still so much regulatory issues associated with providing loans and also being the individual that is responsible for dictating who qualifies and who doesn't. So we decided to just work with the Vancouver Rent Bank on delivering that aspect of kind of our value in a more effective manner, as opposed to trying to, waste the funds, otherwise spending the time and the kind of the fees associated with kind of being legally compliant in this process. And that's how the whole kind of rent bank situation came to be.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that sounds like a very, I guess, complicated and lengthy process, especially as someone who was just in high school. So I guess, like, what were some of the absolute major hurdles that you had to overcome? And if somebody wanted to step into your shoes and wanted to help in the same way that you did, what's some advice that you could give to someone also in high school, or someone who wanted to start out, an organization the way that you did when they were younger? What can you provide for them so that they can, kind of avoid all these hurdles that you went through?
Well, first things first, it's I don't necessarily think avoiding the hurdle is the goal. I actually think starting an organization when you're a little younger, you should try to meet every single hurdle you can possibly get in front of. Sounds very counterintuitive, but there's a lot of things that I use in venture capital, that I use with my own investment fund, that I use with whatever extracurricular activity I'm involved with. A lot of it I attribute to starting my own kind of charitable initiative. It's a lot easier than people will make it out to be, in regards to how the hardest part is often just getting it started and having a genuine idea and passion for helping people. That's the hardest part. Everything else you can Google, you can ask for mentorship, you can ask for guidance from brothers, mothers, parents, entrepreneurs, people of influence, students like myself. There's just an endless list of people on LinkedIn even that you can just kind of talk to that may have industry specification, that may be specialized in certain things. There's just a whole kind of world on how you can operate things. But if I had to kind of condense it all into one takeaway, it's simply just networking. We focused on building a board of advisors pretty much straight out the gate. And just with a board of advisors, we automatically gained a lot more credibility than we were if we were to spend that time, trying to do biz ops or trying to do biz dev. The only reason we won an outstanding youth team designation by the mayor is because we were partnered with the West Vancouver community, right? We ended up securing partnerships to the actual city itself. None of that would have been possible just given the organization, right? It was purely due to the fact of meeting the right people, cultivating the relationships necessary. And at the end of the game, making change is about you having the idea, but having the capacity of building relationships to find people who can fund you. You have to fund an organization, right? So regardless, networking is king in this industry. It's also king in helping you start out whatever venture you decide to take on.
Yeah, thanks for touching on that, because perhaps when we do have a passion for something, we do want to tackle it on our own sometimes, head first into the deep end. But gathering those
sounds
resources.
easier. Like it sounds easier to do it by yourself, but like 2 weeks down the line, you're gonna realize, wow, I wish I had somebody to bounce ideas out of. It's also kind of an accountability thing, right? If you have a board to be accountable to, it's a lot like, okay, we're not doing anything. How do I justify this?
Yeah, and at that age, to be in a position where you're using money as part of your strategy to help these people, it's a lot of power. There's ethics involved. There's, when money's involved, I think you guys made the right play and made a great decision to help people out. So that's awesome to hear. Yeah, also you touching on the preemptive side of poverty, that made me think of a story I heard back a long time ago. I won't be able to repeat it for verbatim, but it kind of went with, you hear a baby crying, floating down the river, and you want to go to their help, you want to go to their aid. So that person runs out into the river and is able to grab that baby and bring it back to shore. But as soon as you tirelessly bring that baby back to shore, immediately you hear two more screams coming down the river. And as soon as you jump back into the river, you hear three more screams coming down from the river top. So by the end of the story, this hero, the hero of the story, is absolutely exhausted. They inevitably drown themselves just from the sheer exhaustion, and they're not able to save any more children. So it's definitely that idea of having the preemptive side, or just simply helping as things occur. So I think that's a great initiative to be able to attack the preemptive things, and definitely make a change to people's behaviors and attitudes, compared to just giving them things to survive, basically.
Yeah, and I think, background is I also did consulting, so pro bono consulting, particularly for social and impact organizations. And the common theme with the social impact is, as founders, you want to do a lot. And there are a lot of different things you want to help correct, because our world is very screwed up in a lot of different ways. But at a certain point, you need to exert enough self-control on focusing on a specific subject, because otherwise you will be completely overwhelmed. Your resources will be spread thin, and at the crux of it, you'll just be less efficient at delivering value to either of the goals you had initially set out to do.
Yes, well said, for sure.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about, I guess, helping these people of the marginalized community with more materialistic things, with their money, or preventing them from going into homelessness in the first place. But is there anything that someone who isn't part of a nonprofit, or doesn't have the resources of helping with microloans, that they can do to, say, fight the stigma against poverty or whatnot? Like, is there anything that we, as, I guess, regular university or high school students, can do with the stigma?
For sure. I mean, the first thing to address is that being homeless does not make you scarier. Being homeless does not make you any different. I think there's, especially mainstream media, or just mainstream, society, it's you often have an image of someone who's maybe mentally ill, or someone who may be addicted to a specific substance. And that's just the commonality in regards to how society perceives homelessness. In reality, they're people who have, made the wrong mistake at the wrong time, right? Their mothers, their daughters, their fathers, their sons. And at its very core, they're people. They're people with incredible stories, who have been through a lot of different things that the average Joe just doesn't, right? So most of us, especially those listening to this podcast, right, we come from kind of a sociodemographic status that makes us so that we're not as vulnerable as some of the people that are prone to homelessness. And it's super important in understanding how lucky we are, but at the same time, passing that luck on to others. Not saying you should give everybody on the street money. Oftentimes, there are certain circumstances where that may even be a little bit more destructive than one may think. The best way is ultimately just to humanize people, right? It's to, first of all, protect yourself, but second of all, be open to the risk of speaking to those that you may find uncomfortable speaking with. You'll be very pleasantly surprised at the stories you end up hearing, right? And at its core, it's just be nice, treat them like people, which they are. And the moment you do that is the moment that, as someone who's a student who may not have the financial capabilities of really creating massive changes in someone's lives, what you're able to do now is you're helping someone change on a mental level, right? It makes it so that they're happier, and as you make other people happier, you're doing something that's helping.
Yeah, and that really resonates with me, because my parents are, I guess, they're a first generation immigrant, so they came here after they got married. back in China and they only had like $50 in their pockets, no job, no home, but they were taken up by some of the nicest people who let them live in their basement until they were able to find a job, until they were able to pay off their loans and whatnot. And now they've raised a beautiful life for me and my sister. And that really resonates with me, because had that couple not taken them in, I wouldn't be here. And I don't know where my parents would be, and I don't know what would be happening with them. But now we're fortunate enough to live in Vancouver and in Toronto, which are some of the most expensive cities in Canada, right?
Yeah, first of all, Vancouver, Toronto as well. Hell yeah. But you definitely bring up the point of, we are very lucky, and things happen for a reason. And, let's do some good with this opportunity we're now given, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I know, Brody, you worked kind of in the downtown east side, and you've heard a lot of cool stories yourself firsthand, haven't you?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I haven't been able to work with so much since COVID has happened with the Vision for Life, but previously did a bit of work with a organization called the Vancouver Virology Center, which was spearheaded to do similar things on the downtown east side, sort of do different HIV and hepatitis C tests, spread awareness about the various diseases like that, and just help out, provide some food here and there. And yeah, I absolutely feel like one of my favorite parts, or I felt absolutely privileged just to be there and hear their stories. There's people that have gone through tremendous tragedy sometimes. They're subjected to cold nights, and people looking at them with could be downgrading or demeaning to be looked at like that from people that passing you by. So to be able to speak to them on a human level, and hear their amazing stories, and really connect with them was truly something that stuck with me, and it's impacted me going forward with Vision for Life for sure.
Yeah, and well, David, you mentioned that you were also from Toronto and Vancouver, so you have that kind of like middle life. Do you notice a difference in the marginalized communities in these two cities? Are they about the same? Like, have you noticed a trend at all?
I think Vancouver has an unfortunate issue of artificially segregating homelessness from the rest of Vancouver. If you look at the way that the kind of homelessness resources are placed, it's very concentrated around certain areas. So Georgia Street, so on and so forth. There are two ways to look at this. It could be a kind of from a planning side of things, where it's like, it's more beneficial to the homelessness population if all the resources were centered around a single area. But at the same time, it's also a question of, was this an intentional way of kind of, for lack of a better term, keep the rest of the city homeless free, just to have that image out there. Regardless of whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the scenario, that's Vancouver. Vancouver's homelessness centered around literally a couple of streets, right? You'll see, a singular individual walking around in other areas every now and then, but predominantly the homelessness population rests on certain hot points and certain hot spots. With Toronto, what it seems to be like, at least through my interactions with Toronto, it's a lot more separated. It's a lot more free, and it's a lot less centralized on certain areas. That does mean that they have less access to traditional resources, but at the same time, it does kind of poke holes in the different ways that the cities are approaching it. Vancouver, in the grand scheme of things, is trying to do a lot, and I think it's working to a degree. The homelessness report is not seeming too great, but we did have an 8% decrease in the past couple of years. So
yeah,
if you'd like to go.
Thanks. Just speaking on the municipality and like city level, as you talked about, when things are so centralized like that, do you think there's a when it gets to that level, should it be more of a responsibility put onto the government, or maybe the different maybe mayors of certain jurisdictions, do you think? Should they have some responsibility?
Well,
Specifically?
it's a very firm, but like, so I'm someone that really likes to take responsibility, and as a result of such, I'm a very firm believer that it is the responsibility of governments to make sure that its citizens aren't in the kind of in the situations they are in. They're responsible for providing opportunities to better themselves. They are also the ones that are responsible for providing, the support for them. To an extent, Vancouver is doing really well, but there's certain areas where they're completely lacking. But regardless, I'm a very firm believer that is the responsibility of municipalities, specifically that of those mayors. You have quite a large budget to work with. Homelessness is not the most expensive issue to solve. It's simply just not, the priority of certain governmental organizations to solve this particular issue at this moment.
And I definitely agree with you. I think one of the more pressing issues in Vancouver, as opposed to Toronto, is our opioid crisis.
Mm.
And COVID-19 has not made it better whatsoever. It's gone a lot worse. And, I remember hearing that we had finally legalized the drugs, and I've been, hoping that someday that would happen, and the government had finally released that they're legalizing these drugs in Vancouver, and I think that was the first big step forward to the opioid crisis, and perhaps even the marginalized community in the downtown east side, and helping them actually with their mental health and with their physical health. And so I'm really glad that you actually brought that up with the government, because I definitely do also believe that they have a big responsibility in fixing this, or at least giving a helping hand.
Yeah, and on the subject of drugs, it's where there are countless studies pointing towards countries that have decriminalized, Class A prohibited substances. Instead of spending the money on enforcement, which would otherwise include fees such as legal fees, the wages, a variety, prison time, whatever. But it's just a lot of wasted money punishing someone who consumed a substance they otherwise might not have had as much choice as people believe they had, in kind of becoming addicted in the first place. So it's a very positive step forward. And the moment we start to spend more of this money on kind of prevention or therapy, or kind of the helping, I guess, get through the withdrawal symptoms. And that's kind of what I'm optimistic towards seeing in Vancouver.
Yeah, that brings up just a thought of mine. So I've taken one psychology class where we really dived into some of the withdrawal symptoms, and kind of touched on like this, like how like it affects your body, and just some things that I found so interesting, because it ties in with what we see with homelessness. And often I've noticed with people's perspective, it's pretty easy to immediately jump and throw them onto a pile saying, oh, they just choose to, stay in this lifestyle, or they all took drugs and they've followed this route down into poverty. When often the stories are much more complex than that. And these drugs have serious, unbelievable effects on the neurological standpoint. It's so much more than just quitting one day. The effects of it are absolutely detrimental to how you choose things and how you interact with people. It's really fascinating. Maybe another topic for some other time to jump into, but that's something I found really, really interesting. So glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's super cool. Not cool, I guess. It's just, there's a lot more, there's a lot less choice than people think there is, right? If you're constantly surrounded by those around you who are consuming illicit substances, which you oftentimes are if you are kind of forced to go towards where the homelessness resources are. There's a lot of instances where someone might have been forcefully made addicted to specific substances for dependency reasons. there's just a lot less choice than people make it out to be. Because remember, we're judging from the perspective of someone who lives in a very comfortable house, who has access to running water, social security number, an address. Those who are maybe, addicted to certain substances, they may not have had the opportunities we've had. They also don't have the resources we've had. So from our perspective, there's a lot of reasons to not do drugs, and there's a lot of reasons why drugs would be particularly bad for our lifestyle. But you have to understand the perspective of others, and that's kind of the whole topic of drugs. There's a lot less choice than people make it out to be.
I definitely agree, and I guess it's the same thing for poverty or for homelessness. It's not simply just a choice or bad spending habits or whatnot. It's sometimes they don't, like, most of the time it's not even their decision. They don't choose to start living this type of life. It's just something had happened, or there was a mistake made somewhere in their life that just, they didn't mean for it to happen. And we all make mistakes, but this one just seemed to take such big stakes. And it just kind of sucks that not everyone, but there is a stigma or a stereotype that's kind of plastered all over it, where it's kind of like, oh, they made that choice. They decided to have terrible spending habits or waste all their money on gambling or whatever it is, but it's not the way that it seems. And I feel like we really have to, as a society, take that step forward and deconstruct and break down these stigmas and these stereotypes plastered like everywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's super pertinent where, wow, I just completely lost my train of thought there.
No worries.
Do you mind just quickly remembering what the first couple of sentences that you were saying were?
Yeah, just how it just wasn't, it's not their choice.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So over 76% or 75% of Canadians are about $250 away from insolvency. So that means is most families in Canada are $200 is a $200 unexpected expense away from being insolvent. That's Canada. And as much as we in Vancouver talk about you own a property, you're a millionaire, there is a larger percentage of Vancouver people that don't own homes. They rent them from others. Let's say your job didn't pay you this week, right? The bills that you had meticulously planned to just be able to scrape by, you're no longer able to pay them, right? There's now a 20% interest applied to this bill. And that's just the cycle that continues to happen for a lot of Canadian families. Homelessness doesn't, just impact bachelors or single people. It impacts families. It splits apart families, right? Because there are certain shelters that are only accessible towards women and children for safety purposes. But what does that mean for the father, right? There's an animation that we're an artist that we were talking to specifically that did animations on homelessness, and it was purely focused on this father who no longer had the ability to spend time with his family because he couldn't live in the same shelter they did. There was kind of a significant distance between shelters he could be at and the shelters his family is in. What would that do to the development of a child? What would that do to the development of a relationship, right? So it's just an infinite number of repetitious cycles that you might not be aware of. So it's a lot. Homelessness at its core is very simple, but what leads to homelessness is a multi-layered issue that social scientists have been spending decades on trying to figure out what happens. So it's both simple and complicated, but it is just a lot easier than people think.
Yeah, and to sort of come full circle where we started off, I think where people can get started with, or what we were doing here today, even having this conversation, having this shift in perspective hopefully with people at home or people watching this, because it really starts off with our culture, how we're growing up, how we see, with how we envision individuals affected by homelessness, right? So it begins with how we're raised and how we shift our perspective towards seeing them. So I'm glad we can have this conversation and kind of hopefully push away some of the stigmas surrounding them. So
For sure.
yeah,
I mean, thank you guys for having me. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks again, David. So as we wind down, is there anyone or any other organizations you would like to shout out? Maybe any other nonprofits you think deserve some more attention, maybe, or no worries if there's not.
Ooh, there are too many. There are too many nonprofits, and I think I haven't done the due diligence necessary to recommend, in good consciousness, a charity. Um, Highly recommend you check out whatever kind of organization this podcast is linked to. And you know what? Just be open to learning new things. More specifically, changing the perception you once held on certain demographics of people. Specifically, towards the homeless, but towards different races, different genders, whatever there is. Just be open to learning different things and looking at things from another perspective. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So if people want to find you or learn more about you, where can they look for you?
For sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, all under the name of David_ZOUU. Somebody took my last name for social media handles, and I was like, I'll just add another U. Nobody can stop me. So here we are. But feel free to contact me if anybody younger or older wants to be more connected to the entrepreneurship space in Vancouver, or the venture capital space in Hong Kong, or finance space in Toronto.
Yeah. So yes, as we conclude, what is, your next step for, I guess, you or your organization? What is your big project that's coming up, or do you have any big ideas that you want to shed light on?
Yeah, so because I'm going to school in Ontario and London, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to be running and being kind of the bottleneck for a Vancouver organization. So currently, we're actually looking for an executive director to operate our Vancouver office. That way, I can do most of the biz stuff virtually through meetings and stuff. But then the actual meetings and the actual activity is being conducted in the physical premise in Vancouver. So that's kind of what's going on. I just came back from a 14-day business trip to Dubai and then Miami for crypto. So I'm actually working on an investment system or a consultancy service specifically for helping institutions adopt onto the altcoin market in kind of making a little bit of money during market crazy times. But that's pretty much all I got going on.
That is amazing. Honestly, wow, you've been able to travel all around the world with your business, and that sounds so cool. I'd love to chat with you someday about your investments and whatnot, but
For sure.
I guess aside from that, I hope that we can connect again in the future, have you on this podcast over time. And yeah, we did learn so much from you today. You've definitely opened my perspective, and I'm really glad that we were able to talk about like stigmas and poverty and the marginalized community. And yeah, Brody, is there anything else that you wanted to say to conclude?
I hope we can connect again in the future.
Hell yeah, man.
Yeah, and continue our conversation going forward about some of this stuff, and maybe branch it out possibly too to some other interesting topics. And yeah, just thanks again, man, for taking the time.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you guys for the time.